Hey everyone, welcome in. We're going to get started here in just a minute. While we're waiting on everyone to join, please let us know in the chat where you're joining us from today. I'm Leah Houston. I'm a senior campaign specialist at DBT Labs, and I am joining you from Portland, Oregon. And I'm excited to kick off today's event, From Stored Procedures to DBT, your playbook for successful migrations. Before we begin, I'm going to talk to y'all about Coalesce, which is the Analytics Engineering Conference. It's crafted by DBT Labs, and it's coming up here in October. We hope that you can join us either in person in Las Vegas or for Coalesce Online, and Coalesce Online is totally free. Coalesce is a really fantastic time. I've been in person the past 2 years. It's a really great networking opportunity. The sessions are going to be really great. We should be dropping the agenda here soon, I believe, so be on the lookout for that. But you can register with this QR code, or we'll drop a link in the chat for you to register that way. But I hope y'all can join us. And some housekeeping things. So Q&A tab, please use the Q&A tab to ask all of your questions, and a DBT expert will answer them for you. We also have the chat tab. That's the tab you've been using to let us know where you're joining us from. So please continue to use that and have some fun with us today. Etiquette, please be kind to your fellow attendees and presenters. We want you to ask the tough questions, share feedback. We're glad that you're here, but let's keep it respectful and inclusive. Recording, we will send out the recording within 24 hours after this event, so be on the lookout for that in your email inbox. And then a survey. We're going to launch a survey towards the end of today's session. We'd love to know all your feedback on it and how to improve these sessions for y'all in the future. And then today's agenda. So first, we're going to start with why stored procedures are misaligned with modern analytics. Then we'll go into the demo and show you how the same logic is expressed and improved using DBT's modern tooling. Then we'll show you a practical guide to assessing, rewriting, modularizing, and validating stored procedures with DBT. And then we're going to show you a real case study, so some wins and lessons from a real DBT migration project. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to our presenters. So take it away, Stephen.
All right, thanks, Leah, for the introductions and kind of walking us through the agenda for today. My name is Stephen Robb, and I'm a partner solution architect here at DBT Labs. I've been here for a couple of months at this point, and I started my career as a software engineer and data engineer at then a BI product before coming to DBT. Today, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the history of kind of stored procedures and how they kind of work their way into what is now kind of the modern cloud framework, which is using DBT for a portion of your data, as well as I'll be introducing you to our great partners over at the data team a little bit later. So let me go ahead and share my screen really quick, and we can go ahead and get this kind of started. All right. So, like we said, to kind of get started there's my picture there. I'm Stephen Robb. And let me tell you a little bit about the kind of legacy recipe. You're going to see a couple of different references throughout the webinar today, with maybe some barbecue or food themes that just try to kind of lighten the content up a little bit. But the general idea here is that I'm going to, like I said, walk you through maybe a little bit of the history of stored procedures and kind of just kickstart it off before we kind of hand it over to the phData team. So before modern ELT pipelines and tools like DBT, stored procedures were the default solution for procedural ETL. Teams adopted them because they were fast, efficient, and convenient, and everything kind of happened inside the database, which reduced data movement and improved performance. They helped kind of organize complex transformation into repeatable, callable units of logic, and even kind of like centralized control over business rules, which for the time was a huge win for governance. Platforms like SQL Server, Oracle, Teradata made stored procedures kind of like a foundational part of enterprise data architectures. And for their time, they solved real world problems. So as data stacks kind of moved to the cloud, however, I'd say like some cracks kind of started forming inside stored procedures. First, they are a black box. You can't version them super easily. You can't really audit them properly or necessarily like explain them well to others. if you've ever asked like where is this transformation happening, it's probably buried in a stored procedure somewhere. Second, they don't support modern software practices. There's no Git control, there's no CI/CD, no easy way to review that code with teammates or to roll back changes. And third, they tie you to a vendor. Code written in T-SQL or PL/SQL isn't portable, and teams find it hard to modernize or migrate. And kind of lastly, they're risky. Stored procedures often lack granular permissioning, so it can be easier to overgrant access than it is to kind of do right necessarily. So kind of in this era of scalable, modular, cloud native data platforms, stored procedures are no longer the required tool they used to be. So why DBT? And this kind of hits home with me because, like I said earlier, I kind of started my career in the software engineering kind of field, and I always wondered why some of the best practices from software engineering weren't kind of brought into the data side. And so that's kind of like the whole foundation of DBT is the analytics development lifecycle, or ADLC as we call it. This life cycle kind of reflects that full journey of developing analytics in a modern cloud-based stack from modeling, testing, all the way to deploying and monitoring. So if you're architecting a cloud solution today, you're not just wiring up tools, you're designing a system that should follow core software engineering principles: modularity, version control, CI/CD, testing, and even like observability. And so that's what this entire life cycle is all about. And DBT platform is designed to help teams kind of put these best practices into action, especially for data. And so why DBT kind of goes in a couple of different flavors. With DBT platform at the center of your data workflows, your data teams are empowered with a governed and scalable approach to not only develop and test their data models, but also explore, improve, and deploy them at scale. Data teams finally have the ability to work more efficiently, remove bottlenecks, and ultimately ship data products faster. Meanwhile, downstream teams are empowered to make more decisions, faster decisions, better decisions because they have a way to interact with that data, to understand its lineage, to contribute to it. And if they're less technical and are using a BI tool to tap into that data, they actually trust the metrics they're receiving because they're consistent, kind of regardless of where they're queried. So having this centralized framework for collaboration feeds this kind of self-fulfilling flywheel that fosters a data-driven culture that data teams can actually keep up with. All of a sudden, your data platform goes from being a cost center to a profit center. dbt also offers built-in user experiences designed to optimize data platform compute and really help teams pinpoint and address kind of inefficient, unused, or long-running models. And many of you have experienced, I would say, problems with data at scale. And that's really what this slide is kind of focusing on, is that dbt isn't just a tool to kind of modernize the approach of directly replacing stored procedures with a dbt kind of structure. It's also how do we enable kind of everyone at a company at scale to be able to trust their data, to be able to work with it across kind of the organization. So, like a few questions would be like, how many times does data come out of the system and it's not necessarily set up for you to draw insights? So you create a pivot table or merge columns. Or how many times have you done things in Google Sheets to manipulate some data that wasn't quite up to what you were expecting when you wanted to use it for some sort of project? So it's like data comes in a shape that is not supportive of what you want to do with the data next. And so this is kind of the entire premise of our business is if you can build it in a spreadsheet, and I build in a spreadsheet sometimes, we may not get the same answer. Our approach to solve it won't be the same. So multiple people with multiple ways creates a lot of issues with a lot of waste. And so everyone kind of struggles with this idea, which is like, why is this metric different across tools? Why is it taking so long to get new data cut? Every new data request requires us to start from scratch. So leaders of both like data engineers, analysts, and operations team really, at the end of the day, kind of just care about a couple of different outcomes, which is we want improved data quality and trust, and we want to have efficiencies and optimize costs. And so the goal here with dbt is that it can help manage that complexity in a way that's modular, scalable, repeatable, and governed, all directly inside of your data platform. Data teams use dbt to transform data into clean, prepared, tested, ready for analysis data sets that can be used to power every downstream use case, whether it's for BI reporting or to power operational use cases. With dbt, you can be confident in your data and that the decisions they inform are accurate, consistent, and shipped to downstream teams with agility. And so that's it for my spiel. I'll come in back towards the end, but for now, I'm going to pass things over to Dustin and Dakota from the data team to walk you through some of their real world experiences. Thanks.
All right, I appreciate the intro there, Stephen, and for telling us a little bit about the history of stored procedures and giving us a good overview of DBT. My name is Dustin Dorsey. I'm a director of data engineering for the phData team, and excited to be here with you guys today to talk about migrations.
Yeah, and I'm Dakota Kelly. I'm one of our principal solution architects over here at phData. You'll notice there's going to be a lot of barbecue, food, cooking references today. Hope everyone's hungry. I know I'm a big fan. I do contest barbecue with my father-in-law for fun. It's one of my big passions outside of data and DBT. But real quick, before we get into stored procedures, DBT, how to migrate them, and all of that, just to give you guys a little bit of background on who phData is. We're a boutique consultancy that does all things data. Our focus is on the modern data stack, whether that's migration, data engineering workloads, artificial intelligence, data science, visualization, data strategy. We run the full gamut with a focus on all things data, including data applications. And with that, like you can see here, 6-time partner of the year for Snowflake, 2-time partner of the year for DBT. We've repeat partner of the year for Fivetran, and so many other of the different tools inside the modern data stack. That's really where we've cut our teeth and built up our expertise. And with that, I will hand it over to Dustin to kick us off on what what do stored procedures look like in the legacy world, and what do they look like when you get into DBT?
Yeah, let's jump into it. And just to throw out there, I am also an avid cooker. I don't think I'm as good as Dakota, but definitely love to eat. So,
I mean, at the end of the day, that's the best part, isn't it?
right,
Enjoying the output after.
for sure. All right, let me get my screen pulled up here. Me. All right, so here we go. All right, so let's take a look at what a legacy store procedure would look like. So whenever you have a legacy store procedure, one of the things, and by the way, the demo that I'm going to show you here, this is syntax that was written against Microsoft SQL Server, but hopefully it's simple enough that it's going to be pretty applicable to what you would see on whatever system that you may have store procedures that exist on. But when you first start building a stored procedure, the first thing you have to do is you've got to create your DDL. So the objects that you're going to be writing to. Stored procedures um, can generally have like multiple steps when you're thinking about ETL, ELT pipelines. So there's multiple steps that these things are going to have to go through, but you need to lay down your DDL first. In our example, we're going to walk through building a customer dimension. So for our customer dimension, we need our raw data, which already exists on our data store in this case. It's already there and available to us. We need to create a staging table. We have our final dimension table that we're going to create. And then finally, we have an audit log table that we're going to create to make sure that we're logging everything about our pipeline as we can throughout the process. So these are the objects these are going to the DDL to create our objects. Now let's jump in and look at what a store procedure would look like. So this is a store procedure that will perform all the steps that we need to load our customer dimension. From a high level overview, we have really 5 steps that are happening within the store procedure, and we'll walk through these each, but I want to call them out from the beginning. The first is extract customer data from a raw source. So we need to take that data, we need to extract it. Second, we're going to transform and stage that data into a staging table. So that staging table that we just created in the previous step. The third is we're going to perform some basic data quality tests. So we need to apply some testing through this Fourth, load that into the final dimension table. And then ultimately, we need to log the outcome into an audit table. So when you start looking at some of the logic, and hopefully as you're watching this, you're like, oh yeah, that resonates with us. We're having to build this. This is a fairly simple example that has these components, and obviously these things can get a lot more complex than generally do. But this is kind of giving an example of some of the things that exist there. In the store procedure, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to declare some runtime variables. So these are some variables used to track errors, track start times, and track some row counts. We're going to use a transaction and a try catch. The transaction is going to make sure that everything that runs within here, either all of it happens or nothing at all. And the try catch is going to be used in case there's an error that actually gets returned. We log that and are going to return that back, so we're aware of what happened. When you get into kind of the meat within what's actually happening within this transaction, the first step we have is we're going to clear any existing data from that staging object. So if there's data in there, so each time this runs, the staging object is going to be cleared. The next step is we're going to extract from raw and transform some data into stage. So in this case, we have an insert statement that exists. We're pulling some data from our raw customer source data, and we're applying some transformations to it. Pretty simple transformation here in which we're doing some stuff where we're concatenating the first name and the last name, removing some white space. And then we've got a filter on here where we're going to filter out email where emails are not like at test.com. So just get that out. Pretty simple. In fact, when you look at this store procedure as we get through it, this is primarily the business logic that exists within it. The rest of it is just kind of all the other different components that make up the process. Flowing on down a little further, we're going to track some row counts on what we load into staging. We've got a couple of tests that run. One of those is going to check for nulls in a few of our key fields, so the customer ID, full name, and email. If it finds nulls, it's going to return an error. The second one is going to look at a uniqueness check, so it's going to check to make sure what's in our staging model for customer ID is unique. If not, return an error. If both of those things pass and everything is good, the final step will load the data from staging into our final dimension table. If there are, and then we'll insert that into our audit log that we created before. If there are any errors that exist there, we're going to roll back the transaction so nothing actually takes effect. And then we're gonna return an error and then log that failure to our audit table so we have a record for that. Now Dakota is going to take this same process and now he's going to show you how you could build this in DBT to make this a whole lot simpler. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that setup. Just as you were looking at that, I'm sure the first thing that stood out is that's a lot of information that we have to put together. We have to define what the table structure is going to look like. We have to audit the table. We have to hand build the tests. We have to create all of this. When we're working within DBT, we actually start to streamline those things. With DBT, it's actually going to act as a compiler and runner to the things that we build. And when I say that, I think what will help is if we start by looking at one of our sources. We come in and we define our source, where it's at within the database, in the warehouse, what sort of structures there are. We can add documentation about the data source, etc. In this case, I'm running on Snowflake here. We can come in here, we can see we're going to build out the same thing on top of a set of customers. You'll notice when we go to my table, I'm not defining any DDL. I am just creating the select statement and applying the business logic that I want. What customer ID do I want? How do I want to concatenate and bring together the first and last name, the customer email, ignoring any of our test users? I bring all of that together here. That's because DBT takes care of wrapping this in the appropriate DDL, DML to bring that data in. What else you'll notice, there's no test here because that was built inside of the YAML that we put together. The YAML allows us to document each transformation, what it's doing, what the purpose of it is, what the different columns are doing, as well as applying data tests here that are just a simple config to say, I want to apply this type of testing to these different attributes. I wrote significantly less code and got much better documentation along the way because I was able to document each of my columns. As we look at this even downstream, often when we're building that last layer that visualization is going to use, one of the things we don't want to do is have that dropping and getting recreated on them, especially if they're actively using it. We can build incrementality into our pipeline. But you'll notice yet again, I didn't write a single merge statement. I didn't write any complexities to that. I just wrote some config saying, I want to incrementally materialize this table. Here's the key I want you to use when merging in. If there's ever a schema change, here's how I want you to handle the schema change in my select statement. Oh, and by the way, I only want the created date to happen the first time because I don't want my created date to change every time that there's a new piece of data brought in. I want it to only be the first time that it comes in. This allows us to do a lot more of those complex statements with far less code because all we had to do was focus on the business logic and the select statement that gets us to that business logic. Again, creating documentation along the way in YAML, defining data tests that we want to execute. I didn't have to write any code to do this test. I was able to use built-ins, and there's plenty, in fact, I would say more than plenty of options built by the community as well, where you rarely need to build your own tests. You can make use of what others have built. And to add on top of that, when dbt runs, you'll notice this target directory here. They build a massive amount of artifacts. These artifacts tell us what dbt has done. What was the run order? What was the state of the project? What objects got executed? What did the adapter return to us when executing? All of this, again, making use of the community, there's a package out there called dbt artifacts that will take all of that logging dbt already does and insert it into the data warehouse on our behalf. So where all I had to do was come in here and say, I wanted things tied to dbt artifacts to go to these schemas. I wanted them materialized in this manner, etc. I didn't have to write any custom logic to help track those sort of changes. And more importantly, because dbt is able to run and understand the run order, all I have to do is tell it, I want it to build my dim customer table. And again, because it's a DAG, that means it uses a graph that we can traverse. It's what my plus there is doing. I can say, I want you to run everything used by dim customer. You'll see the table will build. You'll see that once the table builds, the test will run. If any of those failed, it would have stopped it from propagating forward into the dim table. The dim table is going to run, and then it's going to upload the different objects into my data warehouse so I can track those changes. I'm able to do this with far less code and focusing on the business value and not needing to manually control the order of operations, the DDL, the DML. I just focus on the select statement that creates the data that matters. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Dustin so we can start to talk about what is the playbook or the cookbook, as you will, to help move and migrate your stored procedures into dbt.
Yeah, appreciate it, Dakota. Thanks for giving us just a taste of what dbt can offer us. There's obviously a lot more that we could show in dbt there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that throughout the presentation. Let me go ahead and show my screen back again. And yeah, let's jump into the recipe book here. Or another way to say this is the migration path. So me and Dakota, we work with a consulting firm, phData, and we work with a lot of customers to do migrations from stored procedures. And this is pretty much the playbook that we follow anytime we go work with a customer. Or if you do this without working with a firm like ours, and you want to do this independently, these are generally the steps that you're going to go through to do this. So you have discovery and assessment, the prioritization strategy, migration design choices, building with best practices, and then test, validating, and iterating. And we're going to dive into each one of these a little bit more and give you some insight into what each of these mean. All right. So let's start with discovery and assessment. So this one's kind of like chopping the fat, but keeping the flavor when you're thinking about it in terms of cooking. So when you're getting started, and you need to kind of understand what actually needs to be migrated, right? A lot of the customers that we work with that are moving over aren't moving just like a handful of store procedures. There's usually a lot of stuff there where they have like a legacy data warehouse that's running, and maybe they have procedures that have been running for years or even in some cases decades. of stuff that's running. There's generally a lot of things that exist there. Doesn't always have to be the case, but in a lot of cases when we work with folks, this is what we see. So you need a way to be able to break that stuff down into manageable work. So you do this by finding ways to categorize the sort of procedures that you have there if you don't already have them categorized in some way, like if they're defined based on marts or just in terms of how you modeled them, they have some structure to them. But if you don't have that, we usually recommend categorizing by like business domain, complexity, frequency of use, dependencies, marts, or some other grouping. But you want to get those things in some sort of grouping that gives you some sort of framework to be able to manage those. You also want to determine what is needed and what is not needed. Because if there's places to reduce the scope, you don't want to, if you can avoid it, just do a lift and shift, although that's certainly a strategy that you could approach it with, but try to figure out if there's things that don't need to be moved. And try to reduce the scope in places where you can reduce the scope. And then ultimately understand the pain points that you have with some of these things. If there's problems that you know that exist there, trying to just assess that stuff before. Obviously, assess your sources to make sure that your sources are available in whatever system you're putting DBT on top of. You'll need to understand that. But yeah, this step is largely just discovering what exists there and assessing it. Got any thoughts to
Yeah.
add there?
I think the big thing I would call out is this is a very important step that can sometimes be overlooked because it can be difficult and overwhelming, especially as that list starts to grow, especially for companies that have built up extremely large data warehouses with a lot of assets. The thing I want to call out here is don't get so focused on the minutia. Once you have the minutia, that's important. We need to know what all is out there. But don't sit there and look at that and think, oh my gosh, we have 12,000, 20,000, 30,000 things to move. How are we even going to get there? You'll hear us talk about this. You need to be iterative. Don't let the uh, perfect be the enemy of the good and focus on progress, not perfection.
Yeah, great points there. All right, moving on. So the next step is once you sort of get that assessment and that discovery work done, you need to have a prioritization strategy. So again, and I'm sure you can relate to this, Dakota, like when we're hosting a barbecue and we've got lots of folks coming over, you got to have something to get the party started early with, right? Like, you got something on the grill, it's going to take a little bit, or something on the smoker. You got to start with something easy. So usually when I have folks over, we'll have some chips and dips sitting out, maybe a fruit salad, something just to get started. And it's very similar to like your migration strategy. Like you got to get the party started early, right? Find some ways to get some quick wins to show some value early. Your business is making a huge investment in a new modern data stack and they're wanting to see some value from that immediately. You want to bring some value from that. So, how do you do this with stored procs? Well, first, kind of using the information you collected in the previous step, scope and rank the procs. You've kind of got them grouped together at this point. Look at things like business criticality, places where you have technical debt, or procedures that have stakeholder visibility. Maybe they're supplying data to a critical report, and migration complexity. What you want to try to figure out there when getting started is look for places where you have high impact and low complexity, because those are places that's going to show value very early on, as well as give your team an opportunity to get used to using these new tools and these new things, and get some early wins. Additionally, starting with candidates with frequent change is always a good place. Like if there's store procedures, you're just constantly having to edit all of the time because maybe the business is making new requirements or things are changing or you're having to integrate from new sources. These are good candidates also to start with to go ahead and get them moved over to the system. And then lastly, audit and compliance gaps. Obviously, if you have gaps that exist on the legacy system, you're going to want to get that over and try to get that remediated pretty early on. The one big thing I'll note here is just don't try to boil the ocean in a day when you're doing this. It takes some time to be able to do it. Try to break it up into manageable buckets, focus on stuff that gets you some quick wins, and work through a phased roadmap as opposed to doing it all at once.
Yeah, very much so. And getting those high impact, low complexity things in, think of that like whetting the appetite, like we said, the appetizer to the party. Appetizers keep people because, the saying I often use is anytime I'm barbecuing, the meat's done when the meat's done. It's going to tell me when it's done because every piece of meat's different. They're built different. It's the same way. And so you want those things that get you those quick wins. They let your team get used to the new tools, the new processes in front of them. And more importantly, it gets the business and others excited for the new things to come, the better visibility, the better understanding, the better documentation, the catalogs, all the different things that come with their new tools.
Good deal. Now, absolutely right on there, Dakota. All right, the next one. This is a big one, right? Migration design choices. So sometimes, like, we like to relate this back, and we may butcher this example, but I'm going to say it anyways. Like, sometimes you want to keep grandma's recipe where she's got something really good, but maybe the method is just a little bit out of date. Like, grandma may have been cooking with a kettle over an open fire, but today there are just better ways to be able to do that. Yes, you could still do it, but it isn't the most efficient. Same way with store procedures. There's more efficient ways to be able to do things, and you've got to consider, like, when you're going through these, is do I use a new method or do I just take what exists there and move it over? And this is usually the rewrite versus the refactor that you look at. So with a rewrite, this means you're going to take and you're going to write fresh new logic and you're going to move this over to DBT. The reason you would do this is because either maybe the legacy logic is incompatible or unclear. A lot of times when you're moving store procedures, you're not just moving the store procedure logic itself over to DBT and running against the same data store. A lot of times you're also modernizing the underlying data store in conjunction with that. So moving to something like a Snowflake, a Databricks, a BigQuery, or something like that with it, and the logic just may not be compatible, so you need to do a rewrite of that. Also, you may have like business needs may have changed since that was running. So as we mentioned before, sometimes you just have stored products that have lived there for years or decades that have existed there, and just business needs have changed and it's never been updated. This is an opportunity to go through and rewrite that stuff. In other cases, you may be able to just do a refactor where the stored procedure is good and what it is producing is exactly what the business needs. So in that case, you just need to extract the logic into a DBT-friendly building block. So where you take it, you modularize it, you get it within DBT. In those cases, the logic's compatible, but maybe you just need to add some modularization and some observability to it. Um, as you go through this, just a couple important notes that we want to call out. As you're evaluating this, just make sure you work with your subject matter experts to validate assumptions as you're going through these. If you're making assumptions about your data, try to validate that. Try to preserve intent and improve the design. You don't want to change the intent, but obviously you can make this stuff run a little better. And then lastly, avoid copy and paste. As we work with a lot of customers, we see customers try to take exactly what they have in the store procedure and move that over to DBT. And while technically some of that stuff is possible, it's just not a good design decision. In fact, some of it you're going to get blocked for anyways because DBT models have to be written with a select statement. And when you're coming from store procedure world, that takes a little bit of getting used to. It's like, what do you mean I don't have to build all this other stuff? But it simplifies a lot of that. Like I'll oftentimes when I'm telling people, and I think this is one of the biggest benefits of DBT, is DBT takes a lot of the engineering overhead, some of that stuff you saw with the examples that we showed earlier. It takes it out of the equation and lets you focus on the business data, like on the actual business logic of it and drawing insights from the data, which is the most important there. Dakota, thoughts to
Yeah,
hear?
very much so. No, I agree with all that. Again, you really want to avoid copy and pasting exactly what you had. Sometimes you have no choice. Timelines, other things make that difficult. And that should drive your decision around how much rewrite or refactor you do and where that happens. Sometimes timelines are going to force you to have to do a lift and shift, but make time and be intentional about refactoring as soon as you're out of the old system. If you don't do that, you just bring so much tech debt forward. And often new tools give us new paradigms and new ways of working. If we do not take those into account, we're often going to blow up our budget just trying to address the compute because we're so used to this old way of doing things. I have seen many times where We come in, this sort of lift and shift was taken, but no one spent time to refactor or rewrite after the lift and shift, and costs are out of control. This is a very important decision, and it's something that needs to happen. Sometimes it's a matter of when does it happen.
Yeah, no, great point there. One other thing that I'll mention here, just in terms of migrations as well, I'm not aware of any tools, or at least tools that does this well, that can actually facilitate a migration, the entire migration from a stored procedure over to DBT. There are tools, and even phData has tools that can facilitate like moving historical data over from a legacy system to a new system. But I will say, like generally, getting the logic moved out of a stored procedure and building that in DBT is not usually very complex to make that happen. But if you're looking for an automated way, I don't have a good solution there outside of the data.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And really, at the end of the day, the migration of the code itself is often trivial. You're going to spend far more time auditing and tweaking the results to make sure that they align and that business users can trust them, because migrations are a lot of work and you don't want to break trust along the way.
Yeah, 100%. All right, moving to the next one. So building with best practices. So we kind of relate this to, and I know Dakota can relate to this. Like nobody likes cooking in a dirty kitchen or with a grill that has a whole bunch of things broken on it. Like I don't want to cook on a grill where the propane lines are all clogged up and the knobs are all broken. Like I need to have a good working environment if I'm going to create a good meal. And this is similar with DBT. So as you look to get started, build with best practices from the beginning. We see a lot of people just kind of jump into DBT and look, it's great to get in there and start playing with it, but really try to set yourself up for success from the very beginning rather than later. I appreciate so much the flexibility of DBT, how it allows you to kind of adjust as you get into it, but you'll have a lot more success if you get these things in place before you get started. So what do I mean by this? I mean applying naming conventions and folder structure, making sure your project is set up in a way that you can develop in it and you understand it. Break monolithic logic into layered discrete models. So things like if you follow like DBT recommendations on it, building your models in your staging, intermediate, and marts folders and following that. Implementing test and documentation and version control, doing all of these things from the very beginning are very, very important. Utilizing macros for reusable logic, and which allows you to automate repetitive patterns. So macros in DBT, if you're coming from SQL systems, are effectively just like functions. In fact, I think actually I use them more. I use macros more in DBT than I used functions in legacy SQL systems, because there's so many benefits to it. And lastly, take advantage of native DBT features. There's a lot of stuff that DBT has built in to, again, just remove that engineering overhead burden that you're having to manage and take care of with store procedures and these legacy systems that goes away. You get to focus on the stuff that matters and the stuff that brings meaning, which is the reason that I absolutely love using this tool.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's important with this, when we're talking about building with best practice, I believe it was Buster Posey who said, we should set high standards and believe they're achievable. That means not just setting high standards for your team with here's the naming conventions, here's the folder structure, here's my expectations of what you build, how you test, how you document, how you do pull requests, your style guide. We should enforce those as a part of the pipeline. DBT allows us to meta test and enforce this and test these types of things using things like the DBT project evaluator to enforce our best practices and ensure we have sufficient test and documentation coverage. We can meta test to make sure the appropriate testing is in place, that people are building things appropriately, that they're not causing fan out, that they're not causing other things that are against our best practices, that people are all writing their code in a uniform voice so that way when anyone comes in, they can take over it. This does two things for us as the team grows, as more people get on board. We know that these things are getting taken care of up front. We know they're getting taken care of in the pipeline, which helps us reduce the cognitive load of those who need to review and approve changes. You can then focus on, did the business logic get changed the way it should have, instead of did they name the table the way it was meant to be named? Did they put it in the right folder? Did they add documentation? you'll know all of that's already there. Build that into your process so you can help change and enforce the ways of working within your team.
Yeah. Last note that I'll plug here is just there's a lot of resources that are available on this too. DBT Labs has some great stuff to help you get started. Dakota, you mentioned the Project Evaluator package, which is a great one if you're just wanting to kind of check your project against DBT Labs best practices. You can tweak that package too if you want to take some variation on it. As well as, and shameless plug here, you can check out the book that I wrote, which has a lot of stuff in it as well. We have some great stuff out on the phData website as well as this. The point being, there's a ton of information that is available to you to do this that is not hard to find. All right, moving along here, test, validate, and iterate. So this is a lot like Dakota when we're cooking. Like we like to try the goods before we serve them, right? Like if you're cooking something up and you're spending all day slaving at the grill or slaving in the kitchen, like you wanna try the goods before you serve it. One, you're hungry probably, and then two, you also want to make sure it's up to par, right? And this is similar when you in your migrations that you're doing. Like you need to test, validate, and iterate as you're doing it. So build your models iteratively. Make sure you've got those best practices that we've talked about kind of throughout this presentation and notably on the previous slide. Make sure that stuff is in place, your CI/CD, your tests, your documentation. Make sure that stuff is good and iterate on it over time. Additionally, something that we see happen here a lot in doing this is we see a lot of times when folks are moving from these legacy systems, they run them in parallel for a period of time. I think that's a good thing because you can then validate counts and validate the data between those two systems before you actually retire it off of the old. But I'm sure you got a lot of thoughts here as well.
Yeah, I think this comes back to like good basics. It's easy for us to say, okay, sit here and iterate as you're moving. And a lot of people who love Scrum and Agile, they're going to be like, yes, let's iterate. That's great. But it doesn't end there. Good basics. You know, when we're talking about the kitchen, anytime you watch a cooking show, you can tell who's been in the kitchen a while. Their knife skills. That's usually what shows it off. And that's a very basic and important thing of being in the kitchen and what we do and what we work with in that area. As data people, those basics for us are things like the 4, 5, 6 V's that we address, the way that we've built up our process, the way that we've added things in there to the documentation. We want to make sure that these things are iterated and changed over time because once you get past the migration, things are still going to change. DBT is going to help us be less reactive, but there are still changes that are going to happen beyond what we know. We are often upstream of data sources. We can't control how the variety of data is going to change, how the velocity. There's a number of different things that can change. Your enterprise that you're working for could suddenly see a massive uptick in people adopting its tools, causing massive change. So you need to stay open, you need to stay agile, you need to continue to test, validate, and iterate, not just when you finish the migration, but going forward, so you can make effective use of what you've built, the new cloud platforms, and more importantly, so you can keep a pulse on the FinOps side of everything that you've built and ensure that you're following best practices, you're building things appropriately. You don't have some old legacy process that's kicking off and rebuilding a table that has terabytes of data on a small warehouse and causing massive spillage and taking days to run. Or even worse, a table with 10 records is spinning up a 6XL warehouse. There's no need for it. So continue to iterate, continue to learn, and continue to pay attention to the patterns that come in because things will change underneath you. And DBT makes it easy for us to iterate and address those changes with things like micro batch processing, incrementality, the way we approach the data, the way we test our source data, etc.
Yeah, that's great points there, Dakota. All right, last thing that we'll mention here is just think of your migration. This isn't really a step, but just something to keep in mind as you go through this. Think of your migration as a modernization opportunity. It's really a good chance to rethink your data architecture. There's a lot of things that can be unlocked beyond just kind of the things that we've talked about in this short session. There's a lot of things to consider there. So migrations unlock velocity, reliability, and transparency, and just really allow you to be able to speed up. And then as you're going through these exercises, just recognize you're not alone. And there are folks like us at phData and who are experts who can help you and work with you to accelerate success here.
Very
Totally.
much, very much. No,
Yeah.
just it is a modernization opportunity. Everything from not just your systems and the technology, your data models, your modeling paradigms. It's all those things we need to be looking at them and thinking, how can we do this better?
Yeah, absolutely. With that, I'm going to jump off the call. I want to thank you all so much for listening to me talk here for the past half hour. I'm going to kick it over to just Dakota, who is now going to walk you through a real world example from a customer that we have worked with. Thank you guys very much. Over to you, Dakota.
All right, thank you very much, Dustin. I'm sure everyone's very excited to go over a case study. What I want to cover is that this case study is very real. You can go find it on the phData site. We helped a large B2B SaaS software company modernize their data stack by implementing these modern data tools like the dbt platform, Snowflake, Airflow, etc. As a part of this, I'm going to go over what was the problem that they were running into, what solutions did we implement, and what were the results that came out of that. You'll notice as I discuss these things, this is not only a more real world example, but it's going to follow a lot of the things we talked about in our previous set of slides, and it's going to help us explain why those are important. So let's get this kicked off. Let's talk about the problem that we were running into. And really, the main problem that they were running into was they were receiving an unprecedented amount of rapid organizational growth. This growth really put strong strain on their infrastructure, and it became clear that their infrastructure was not prepared to address that. The legacy stack they had built up was unable to handle the load and started to crash frequently. Over time, this caused performance issues, which bled into customer-facing systems. It began to degrade the satisfaction and the trust of the business and the customers, and more importantly, it began to complicate the ability to make data-driven decisions, which is not something we want to ever do. This is the last thing we want to do as data people is impact our customers and impact our business or take away their ability to trust and grow and build data-driven decisions. And so you may be wondering, how did we help them resolve that? Our solution was to modernize their tools and focus on utilizing things like the dbt platform to improve all of this. This meant switching to a modern cloud solution like Snowflake, where they could migrate their warehouse and have more scalable compute, advanced analytics, where they could pay only for what they use and have strong data sharing capabilities to help get information back to their customers. We then made dbt the heartbeat of that platform by implementing that as the transformation layer. The dbt platform is where everything happened. We were able to separate out the different environments. We were able to enable version control, bring stronger peer review, enable best practices, and along the way, this improved their ability to troubleshoot and greatly reduced their cycle times when it became time to develop. They were able to iterate and release code faster, more efficiently, with better trust and knowing they weren't breaking something. Over the top of all of this, to handle ingestion, orchestrating the pipeline, and the tightly coupled process that they needed, we put Airflow in place to help call and orchestrate things over the top and make sure that things ran as they would and act as, again, the orchestrator to keep everything running as it should. This allowed us to build very reliable, redundant pipelines that could respond appropriately to what was in front of them. And on top of that, we at phData believe strongly in building partnerships with our customers. And we focused on building a strong partnership that was targeted at a common set of goals. What this meant is that we did things like re-engineering the API integrations to make them more redundant, build in better restartability and other things. We refactored scripts into robust data pipelines with dbt. We were able to embed best practices that drove that velocity improvement, drove the ability for them to produce more efficiently while building trust. And we were able to do this and migrate their entire system all in under 12 months. So you might be wondering, what did this result in? Well, it resulted in a number of things. One, it allowed us to help unify their ingestion and improve the different sources that were all providing information, get those into Snowflake, allowed us to start to enable some richer customer and prospect insights into their data. We were able to dynamically enhance the data thanks to dbt. We were able to build with better scale and agility. This allowed us to do things like improve the skills of the team, grow the team, as well as provide better onboarding efficiencies and process enhancements, allowing teams to work within their domains of expertise while everyone was marching to the same beat of what good looked like. This was done to lead towards better data to help the customer make better decisions. This meant implementing things like lead scoring and prioritization and other things that rebuilt the trust the customer had, as well as allowing us to retire this legacy system that was no longer trusted. We were able to do it while lowering the overall cost and the total cost of ownership. We were able to now empower the business to make real decisions that were grounded in timely data, which really brought that trust back. And you might be wondering, that's great. What should I do with that? The big takeaway I want you to remember is that using the modern best-in-class tools like the dbt platform, like Snowflake, like these other cloud tools, and re-architecting the core capabilities for resilience and scale allows us to take advantage of the new paradigms, the new processes that make our life easier, can reduce our cortisol levels because we are no longer waking up in the middle of the night wondering if the pipeline ran successfully. Things are just running. We were able to focus on building a strong partnership so we could accelerate and help them build in-house skills and proficiencies in their new tools and iterate quickly. We focused on driving tangible wins by making sure we were able to operationally improve things, adding team empowerment, and more importantly, getting that first big win with something that was high visibility but low complexity, allowing us to drive that value. The other thing I want to hit on here is that it's not just doing this that makes our life easier. When you follow best practices, when you do things the way that you're supposed to, you will greatly reduce your cloud spend. You can see here, this is from another one of our case studies where just implementing best practices with minor optimizations, we were able to get an 85% decrease in wasteful consumption just off of those two things. That's why it's important to do that and why it's important to refactor and make sure that we're making use of the tools in the way that they're meant to be used as we migrate into these, as well as addressing our legacy technical debt. And with that, I want to say thank you to everyone here. I appreciate all of your time. I hope everyone enjoyed this presentation. I hope you enjoyed our food and barbecue theme we had going here. And more importantly, if any of you have questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me or phData. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I will happily answer questions. I'd like to thank dbt for allowing us to be here. And more importantly, Stephen is going to come back on stage to help summarize everything and give you all some next steps. I hope you all have a fantastic week, and I look forward to hearing from you again. Thank you. Goodbye.
Huge thanks to Dustin and Dakota for walking us through that great real world example of how you can go from stored procedures to dbt. I wanted to just kind of wrap up this webinar and walk you guys through a couple of the kind of key takeaways. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Yeah. So, like we kind of discussed earlier, we can kind of break this down into a couple of different parts. We talked about the limitations of stored procedures, why the DBT, and then the phData team kind of walked you through what it looks like to actually implement it. And so, just to kind of summarize that, the key limitations of stored procedures mean that they are missing a lot of the functionality that you get with a modern data stack today. And so DBT offers kind of a proven modern alternative to stored procedures. And what the phData team was able to do is show kind of a clear migration strategy that does make it achievable and possible to your team. While there isn't necessarily an easy button, we can definitely say that the benefits outweigh the cons in that once you've implemented DBT, it's going to improve data across your entire organization. And as one last kind of food metaphor in this presentation, hopefully you guys aren't sick of it. I did want to walk you through just a really like a stored procedures versus DBT in this kind of barbecue metaphor in that stored procedures are kind of like having one master chef cooking everything in a closed off smokehouse. You can smell the results, but no one else can really see what's going on. The recipes are kind of secret. It's hard to make changes. And if that chef leaves, like good luck getting that barbecue ever again. So it's like you might get a great brisket or data, but you're kind of flying blind and it's hard to scale. So to kind of compare that to DBT, DBT would more be like a Korean barbecue or like a backyard barbecue in that you kind of have like a shared recipe book. You have prep stations, you have clear roles. But what's really neat about it is that everyone can kind of contribute. The analysts are kind of marinating the data, the engineers are manning the grill. Everything's tracked in Git, so you know who brought the potato salad and who accidentally oversalted the ribs. It's modular, transparent, and repeatable. And if anything goes wrong, you can trace it back and fix it fast. And so, to fully wrap up, I really again wanted to thank the phData team for joining and running a fantastic webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us, and please feel free to connect with us in the chat. You can click the link to an expert button on the top right-hand corner of Goldcast, and we can chat with you directly there. From the partner organization, I also have to do a shout out for the new architect certification. Not only does it prove that you know DBT, it's now the new way that we can validate that you know DBT platform. So there's a lot of advantages to being able to say that you are an expert in kind of deploying and managing DBT at scale or for enterprises. And a lot of our team has put together a great study guide and a lot of learning management kind of system content to make sure that your team is kind of ready for that sort of certification. But it's really exciting, and I recommend that you all kind of give it a chance. And then we also have our Coalesce event coming up in the fall, so hope to see you all there in person. And as always, if there's any additional feedback, please take the quick Goldcast survey towards the end of this. But yeah, thank you all again for joining and looking forward to seeing you guys in another webinar. Thank you.